how would you define productivity, like in your own words? Like, what does it mean to you? Like, what metrics do you use to measure your own productivity and stuff like that?
Sure. I mean, this is what I was referring to earlier when I said I'm almost a little critical of the idea of productivity, because like what is productivity? Like it depends on what your goals are, right? So there is this, in physics, velocity is not just your speed, it's also the direction that you're going in. So you have to set a direction first. And so in some ways, it's like, are you able to achieve your goals? Are you getting work done towards your goals? Which may or may not be things that look productive to people that, aren't don't share your goals, right? So, a long walk with the dog can be very productive if you're trying to like write a book, right? Because that's where all of the ideas come from. And so like, I don't know that you can give like a single definition of like work per unit time or anything like that. It's more of like, are you effective when you need to get something done? Might be how I word it.
I'm not a software engineer, but I know quite a few, actually quite a lot of software engineers in my life. I'm actually curious because like I've tried coding before for like a period of time, and it was just like very, very hard for me to just like focus for such a prolonged period. And like I mean I could do it for like maybe like a day or two out of the week to kind of just like completely focus on building out like my code, but it's just like I can't really imagine like, spending like 40 hours a week just like coding in like a super intense focus mode. How do you do that? Or is that like a very like exaggerated view on what the software engineering day to day looks like?
Yeah, I think there's two parts of that. One thing is just, well, I'll come back to the interest part. I do think that is an exaggerated view where, like, as a working software engineer, I think there is programming, there is software engineering. They overlap, but they are not the same, right? And as a working software engineer, I'm not spending 8 full hours a day just at my laptop coding. There's a lot of time spent, famously, software engineers have to work with people, and they're like, get good people skills because you need it. But I spend a lot of time, like, talking to product managers and being like, when you say you want this feature, what exactly do you mean? And like when we build it, what is the goal that we're going for here in case we can't build it exactly the way that you want it? And I think like a lot of the really productive software engineers or effective software engineers, especially in the more product oriented side of things, are folks who are very good at building those relationships and like spending time productively that isn't spent on coding, right? Because you can spend weeks building something and then realize you didn't need it in the first place. So I think that is one thing that like, yeah, I'm not actually spending 40 hours a week coding. I'm spending, I don't know, maybe 20, depends on the week. Some weeks it's more, sometimes it's less.
That's a good point. I feel like the 1 hour you spend like talking to product people about what you should actually build will save you from like 5 hours of coding that just gonna get thrown away anyway. So.
How do you actually stay productive when like the work is also collaborative? Because like I often kind of see productivity as something as like solo work, kind of like when you dedicate like maybe like 3 hours in your day to like just like hash something out. Whereas I feel like software engineering, like there are actually oftentimes scenarios where you actually have to work with other people, like for example, to work out like the requirements for the product. And then does that mean like how does kind of productivity apply in those contexts?
I mean, that's why we invented meetings, right? Like with set meeting
Right.
time. Yeah, I think it's important to like guard your time. I'm lucky because at my workplace, I think we don't have that many meetings. We're not a super meeting heavy culture. I've certainly heard of companies where you spend 6 hours a day, even as a software engineer in meetings. But it is something where like you need those blocks of like 2 hours where you just put your headphones in, turn on Do Not Disturb, and you're like, okay, I'm just going to build this thing in this next 2 hours and see how far I get. So I think that's true for a lot of creative work. There's this like idea of deep work. I forget who came up with it, but there's this idea of deep work and like, having these like big blocks of time where you can get really invested in your work because, an hour in 10-minute blocks is very different from an hour in a single 1 hour block. And I think that's true for writing. It's true I'm sure it's true for illustration, for many other creative disciplines, where you just need like a big block of time that you can devote to it, which is sometimes easier said than done. I am really curious how folks with children do it. That is something that I don't know. I don't know that many folks with kids that I would feel comfortable asking, or at least folks with like major creative practices. But that is something that I'd be really curious about is like where do you find time? And is it just like, do you just transition to like, I don't have hour-long blocks and I will get everything done in 10-minute blocks? I don't know. I don't know how they do it.
I feel like for context switching, at least, like, I don't know if this happens for other like people like who do like creative things, but I feel like I end up working on or ideating while I'm doing other things, like random things. Like I'm like getting coffee, and I'm like figuring out what I'm going to do. And when I'm actually have like 30 minutes to actually do what I need to do, it's just like writing down what I already thought about for the past like 6, 7 hours.
I think that was the thing I said earlier about like the dog walks can be productive. Like I feel the same way where like often you'll solve a problem when you least expect it.
What are some of the tools that you kind of use for like your deep work?
Sure.
Like it could be like you're plugging in your headphones, listening to your favorite music and stuff like that. It doesn't have to be like a software.
Well, I have a lot of software that I can recommend, but yeah, no, like you said, plugging in your headphones and listening to music that's really helpful. I've actually really liked these AirPods. I resisted getting AirPods for a very long time because I'm like, I'm not going to be one of those rich techies. And then I got them, and they're really nice, and I see why they're
noise canceling is life changing.
Exactly. I put them in, and I'm like, whoa, they did this in like these tiny things.
Yeah.
And it's just really nice that if somebody's running the vacuum or something, I can put them in and just like tune out the world for a little bit. I'm one of those proponents of like it matters more what you do with it than with the tool, where you can write a novel in literally any word processor. If you want to do it in Google Docs, I know people who've done that. It works great. I happen to use one called Ulysses. It's like a very good editor, but it's literally just like I tried it once because they had a 7-day trial, and it just clicked for me, and I was like, okay, I can write literally an arbitrary amount in this. And so I keep using it, but I can't necessarily recommend it to anyone else because it's like it clicked with me. If it doesn't click with you, that it's more about what tools you want to use. Love Obsidian. I could talk about Obsidian for hours, but it's something where like either you're going to click with it or not, and like it's something where like I think I'd be doing a lot of this stuff whether or not I had it. It just helps me do it. Yeah, I guess that didn't answer the question at all. The answer is just you find a way to do the work, right? You just got to break it down, put your headphones on, open your laptop, and just do it.
I was also recommended to use like the Pomodoro technique if I really can't like stay consistent. Yeah, for those that don't know, like the Pomodoro technique is essentially so you specify like a task that you want to do, and then you set a timer usually for like 25 minutes, but it's also adjustable based on focus and your stamina. And then after 25 minutes, you take like a short break, like around 5 minutes, and then you repeat that cycle. And I think it like generally works for me when I just like I'm really determined to like get something done, but like it's actually really hard to kind of stay consistent using that technique. I feel, especially like when I feel a little bit lazy. It's like staying consistent is actually key, but it's really hard.
Yeah, I just do that same thing just with the timer. Also, whenever you feel like you need a distraction, that's when you should have a distraction and go back to work.
Yeah, I've tried Pomodoro and it's never worked for me, but I think that's because I get into flow state and I don't want to stop after 25 minutes. I'm like, no, like I don't need the break. I'm in for me, the initial hurdle is usually the biggest problem. I don't want to start things, but then once I do, it's fine, and it's like the Pomodoro just doesn't help.
Yeah, I think like one other like benefit of Pomodoro is also to like prevent burnout, which is like something that I kind of struggle with, like we talked about in our previous episode, which is like when we're in that flow state, we forget to take breaks or we don't want to take breaks, but Pomodoro kind of like forces you to do that a little bit so that you actually don't burn out, because like sometimes like the mind and the body kind of aren't really linked.
Yeah, have you all found like a consistent rate? I think for myself, like for writing, it's 500 words a day, where it's like I write 500 words a day, rain or shine, and that gets me roughly a novel in 3 months. I'm curious, do you have any rules of thumb, like similar rules of thumb for other disciplines or other things you've worked on?
For me, yeah, I don't think there's like one, like I don't use, I guess, numeric metrics, more like a feeling. Like even if I'm writing, like if some words will take hours, like sometimes it'll take me like hours to write like a paragraph. It's just like doesn't feel right after you read it. But then some other one that's like effortless. So I guess maybe like the completion, like having completed something, even if like quantize it or it's the same.
I also don't have like a concrete number, but I actually have thought about getting into, for example, writing, because I know that at my current capacity and capability, like it's really hard for me to like just spit out like 500 words a day. And I wonder actually how you got to that level. Like, did you build from like 100 words a day, something like that, to 500 words, or did you kind of just like start with that?
Would you say you're a perfectionist? Because I feel like I am, and I feel like that is why I can't do stuff like that.
Right? Because like if I were to write like 500 words, like it has to be like something up to like a par. Otherwise, I won't feel comfortable publishing or just even like saving it somewhere. Like I would have to go back and like revise and make sure it's like perfectly polished.
Yeah, you got to get into that like drafter's mindset. You can always go back and edit it, right? Writing is rewriting, as they say. Um, in answer to your question, I don't. I built up to it. I think I tried a few different rates. So in particular, there's a program called NaNoWriMo, National November Writing Month, that you may have heard of, where the goal is to write a 50,000 word novel in 1 month, and a lot of new writers try it because it's just like a fun, you to see if you can actually do it. It's extraordinarily difficult because you have to write about 100 words a day, which takes a lot of time, like no matter how garbage it is. And it has to be very garbage because otherwise you'll be spending like 6 hours a day on this, and no one has time for that. But that is kind of the point, is to like break you out of like it has to be perfect, because it's just an arbitrary goal where it's like you can just write like, and they walked and walked and walked and walked and like no description, and make it really crappy. So I did try doing that 1 year, and I did it in about 6 weeks. So I cheated a little. It was closer to 1,000 words a day, but it was not sustainable. That was during the pandemic, and it was very I mean, nobody left the house, right? So I had a lot of time in the evenings. So I did try a few different numbers, and I settled on 500 as just being what I was most comfortable with. But yeah, I am very I'm not a perfectionist at all. I'm really there to just get it done, and so I do think I put in enough effort to make it like a readable first draft. But writing is rewriting, and so you have to just get used to like going back and reworking it at some point.
It's kind of interesting that I've noticed a lot of like for example, you guys like software engineers, but you also kind of pair that up with a writing hobby. Why do you think
Yeah.
that's the case? Because I've noticed this pattern a lot in a lot of my programmer slash software engineer friends. And like, do you think like the habit of like writing has helped you in your work, in your career as well?
I would say, yeah, writing and programming, I categorize them in the same way as like creative expression in a way. Like you have something you want to convey, and there are some combination of words you'll type to achieve that goal. And how you get there is like, it's up to you.
Yeah, and I think there is a connection in sort of like these levels of structure where, like, for instance, if you're writing a novel, there's the overall plot of the novel, there's the characters, right, and what their personalities are, there's the chapter level of like that's its own story, and then like the sentence and paragraph level of like what it sounds like. And that is very similar in software engineering, where like you have this giant complicated system, and you have these subsystems, and then there's messages getting sent across from them, and there's some data that's important in different places in different ways, and then there's just even the like line by line, like what does this code look like. And so I do think that like sort of writing is rewriting. I'm going to keep saying that, but that's also true in software engineering, where often I'll write something and come back to it 6 months later, and then I'll be like, why did I program it this way? Like this clearly is a terrible way to do it. I have a better way to do it. And I think that sort of like ability to decompose things and like destructure it is very similar across the disciplines. And just like, yeah, the idea that like a novel can be turned into a set of one word after another, and software, some complicated iPhone app or whatever is, can ultimately come down to like one line of code after the other. I think it's somewhat similar.
Yeah, it definitely makes like learning a lot faster and more efficient. Which actually makes me wonder like if our body and brain can actually like handle like all of like this learning speed at like the rate that AI is able to kind of feed to us. Yeah, I feel like we're gonna have to like increase our bandwidth of absorbing and processing all the knowledge. Because like I do agree that like with what you said earlier about how when you want to just like learn about something, like these days I feel like you could just, if you want to read a book but you really don't have the time and energy to finish like a really thick 700 pages kind of book, you could just go to ChatGPT and type in, can you summarize this book in like 15 sentences or 10 sentences for me, and ChatGPT just does that for you. And then you could just like get the gist of it within like 5 minutes of reading those decent, and does a pretty good job of summarizing and picking out like the meat.
But I guess like if it's like, for example, like a novel, like one of my favorite books is like Crime and Punishment. I feel like somebody could tell you exactly what the message was.
Yeah.
But unless you read it, like you wouldn't really feel the weight of it in the same way. So it doesn't leave as much of an imprint on you, I guess.
That's true, but I do think there's like a lot of like nonfiction, particularly where it ends up doing a lot of anecdotes, and you're like, yeah, I could have just kind of read the 2-page summary and it would have been
Yeah.
almost as good. Like, I've certainly read some books before where I'm like, this has a really interesting idea, but then it expands to like 500 pages just to like repeat the idea over and over.
Yeah. Like for a research paper, it'd be amazing because you can just like really distill what you actually need to read.
In what areas do you think you have grown the most in recent years? And this doesn't have to be productivity related.
It's anything.
Well, I became an extrovert, so that's interesting. I don't know if you could consider that growth. Maybe that's sideways growth instead of upwards growth. But yeah, over the course of the pandemic, I suddenly became an extrovert, and I can hold normal adult conversations now. It's very strange feeling. I'm much less shy than I used to be. It's don't know how I did it, but
That's very interesting
Yeah.
because I've heard more people talk about how they've grown more introverted over the course of
mm,
the pandemic than the opposite. So like what do you think like that you've maybe proactively did to grow into that more extroversion?
I think there's a few things. I mean, one thing was that I think I've basically finally realized that I don't need to worry. I mean, it's a cliche, but it's like, oh, don't worry what people think about you. Obviously, I still worry a lot about what people think about me. But I have realized that the conversation is a two-way street, and if you go to a party and you have a really awkward, stilted conversation, that does not necessarily say anything about you. It could be that the other person feels very awkward. And I've realized that if you just go and be confident and like talk, people are very interested in talking about themselves and hearing about you. And so if you have an awkward conversation, it's like, it's just not the right time, right? Like, or they're not in the right headspace, you're not in the right headspace, and it doesn't mean that like you're weird. You can just go out there and talk to people. So that's one thing. And just in general, like, yeah, realizing that I actually do like spending time with people. I mean, yeah, I think I was much more guarded about my time before the pandemic, and now I'm just like, nope, I will find something to do every day, and it's all good.